So Zulisy just dropped another new optic, and this is the Z2-R. But what's cool about this optic, and a first for Zulisy, this has the DeltaPoint Pro footprint. Let's check it out. Alright, here is our Zulisy Z2-R, and this is a red dot. They also have a green dot version of this, and it is called the Z2-G. Now I'm going to bring a picture up on the screen so you can see everything that comes in the box. Now this does have the DeltaPoint Pro footprint, and this is Zulisy's first time putting out a DeltaPoint Pro footprint dot. Now this does have a pretty good size lens in this. This is a 26mm lens, and it is a coated lens. Now let's go over some quick specs on this. This does have an overall length of 1.89 inches. The height on this is 1.06 inches. The width on this is 1.41 inches. And this optic weighs in at 1.69 ounces. Now I've got the dot turned on. This is a 3 MOA red dot, and the green dot is also a 3 MOA dot. Now I've got this turned all the way up. It is super bright, and I'm actually getting very little starbursting even though I've got this turned all the way up and it is a red dot. I do have astigmatism. There's nothing wrong with the dot. It's just the way I see a red dot, but I am pretty impressed with what I'm seeing here. Now this does have 10 brightness settings, it has 8 daytime settings and 2 night vision settings, and your brightness level adjustment buttons are here on the side. You got your plus here at the top and the minus here at the bottom. If you want to shut the optic off, you will hold down on the minus button for a few seconds and it will shut the dot off. We also have a built-in backup iron sight, which is really nice because if the optic fails, you'll be able to use this rear sight with the front sight on your gun. Now, this does have shake awake, so after you manually turn the dot back on, if you set your gun down and the optic senses no movement, it will shut off after 4 minutes. Now, this does have an aluminum housing. It does have an IPX7 waterproof rating, and it does come with Zulisy's lifetime warranty. Now, one thing that I like to do in every one of these optic review videos is test out the windage and elevation. I want to see how tactile and audible the clicks are. As far as the elevation goes, you do have the up arrow right here, and it does say up, and over here on the windage side, we do have an R with the arrow pointing down. So let's check the windage first. Wow, those are really nice. Nice tactile clicks. Let's check the elevation. Same thing on the elevation. Wow, that is really nice. Now our test gun that we're using for this review is the Ruger RXM. And the main reason we're using this gun is because it's the only gun that I have that I can direct mount a DeltaPoint Pro footprint dot to the slide. I do have other guns in my collection that have optic mounting plates for the DeltaPoint Pro footprint, but anytime I can direct mount an optic to a slide, that's the route I'm going to take. Now, as soon as I got to the range, I got the optic sighted in. I set up some USPSA and steel targets at 15 yards, and I was struggling. I was out filming shooting footage for 4 different videos, and it didn't matter what gun I shot that day. I was shooting absolutely terrible, and my groups are going to show that. But even though I was having an off day with the shooting, I always enjoy shooting the Ruger RXM. All right, here we go. We've got all our hits on this piece of steel. Our next target, we've got all alphas, but we've got a Charlie up here. And our next target, I've got all alphas, but 1 Charlie. Just missed the perf. And on our last piece of steel, I did have a miss. It's gonna be one of them days. I'm not shooting well. So let's talk about the glass quality and the brightness and clarity of the red dot. Now, like all the Zulisy optics I've tested on the channel, the glass quality is really good. It does have the slightest bit of blue tint to the lens. And as far as the red dot goes, when it comes to brightness, it is plenty bright. One thing with Zulisy, their red dots are always very bright, and their green dots are very bright, and even a little bit brighter than what the red dots are. The emitters that Zulisy uses in all their optics is pretty impressive. Now, like I said, when we were going over all the specs of this optic, I said that I was getting very little starbursting on the red dot, and as soon as I got to the range, it was the same out there. Very little starbursting. Now, being that the red dot on this optic is so bright, I did not have to run it maxed out on 10 like I do with a lot of other optics. I actually turned this down to 8, and that was all I needed throughout the day for this review. All right, we got all our hits on our first piece of steel. Next target, we've got all alphas, but we've got a Charlie right here next to the perf, and 1 out here. Not too good. But the next target, we've got all alphas. And this time, we've got all our hits on our last piece of steel. Now, one other really nice thing with this Z2-R is the window size. It's got a very nice wide window on it. It's not very tall. I do prefer a little bit of a taller window on an optic, but it is definitely nice and wide, and I was having no issues transitioning from target to target. And even though I was struggling keeping my hits in the A zone, that was all me and nothing to do with the optic. Now, the next thing I wanted to do was move on to shooting some 10-shot groups, which that went about as well as shooting the USPSA and steel targets. But the more I kept shooting, things started to tighten up a little bit. All right, I made a little adjustment to the left on the dot. Let's see if this gets a little better. Now, after I shot the first 2 10-shot groups, we moved over to the back of my Ram. We put the tailgate down, and we started racking the slide off the back of my tailgate with the optic. I wanted to see if this optic was going to lose 0 or come loose on the slide, and I'm happy to report that it did not. So let's start going over all the pros and cons of the Zulisy Z2-R. We're going to start with the cons first, and I really don't have any cons with this optic. I'm just nitpicking a couple things that I just personally don't like. And the first thing is going to be the window on this. And I just prefer a window that's a little bit taller. Now, this has a very nice wide window on it. It's just a little shorter than what I like. But there are a lot of people out there that like this style of optic, and this is going to work great for them. And my second con, which really isn't a con, it's just you're going to be a little limited to what this optic's going to fit on. There's not a lot of guns out there that have the DeltaPoint Pro footprint. It works great with the RXM. It would work great with the Springfield Echelon and the SIG 320s. but there are not that many guns out there that have a direct mount option for a DeltaPoint Pro optic to go right on to the slide. Now, a lot of optic ready guns out there that have optic plates with them, most of the time there will be a DeltaPoint Pro optic plate in the box. I do believe my Taurus came with one, my G3 Tactical, and my TX22, I do believe both have DeltaPoint Pro adapter plates. And I do believe my Canic TP9 SFX has one, and I'm sure I have one or two others that have a mounting plate. But I just want to stress about that footprint, because if you have a slide with the RMR footprint, well, this optic is not going to go on that slide. So now let's dive into all the pros, and there are quite a few pros when it comes to this optic. The first pro, side load battery. And I actually like this style of side load battery. Some people don't like it because the optic housing kind of hangs over to the one side and it just doesn't look uniform. I personally like this style of side load battery. You can pretty much use a coin or any flathead screwdriver to remove this. My biggest problem with side load battery trays, which mostly all optics nowadays have those, it's very easy to lose those tiny little screws when you have to change the battery out. So I just personally think this is a really good design. My next pro is the fact that it has a backup iron sight built into the optic. Now with this gun, I don't really need it. I'm still able to co-witness my iron sights on the RXM, but if I did not have the rear sight, I would be able to use this with the front sight on the RXM if my optic were to go down. I just personally think this is something that needs to be on every optic. The next pro is all the protection around the glass on this optic. The glass on this sits back nice and far, and there is all kinds of protection here. And obviously when I was racking this off the tailgate of my truck, it didn't do any damage to the glass. It didn't get scratched or anything like that. It is incredibly dirty right now because I have not cleaned the optic since I got back from the range. The next pro with this optic is the fact that it does have shake awake. And we're doing something new on the channel now. Instead of testing the shake awake before we go to the range, we're testing it afterwards. I just think it's a better test after you get 200 or 300 rounds racked up on the optic and it's been reciprocating on the slide back and forth all day. And I'm happy to say that the shake awake is working just fine. My next pro with this is the brightness level adjustment buttons here on the side. Now, even though this does not have a lockout feature like the Zulisy does that I just did a review on, they are nice and recessed in. They are very tactile and audible when you are clicking the buttons up and down. And the reason I bring it up about how they are recessed in a little bit is because if you want to use this for carry, your buttons aren't sticking way out off the side of the optic and you have to worry about these buttons getting bumped and getting your brightness levels out of adjustment, or worst case scenario, the optic getting shut off. And I know we talked about it when we were going over all the specs of the optic, but the windage and elevation adjustments on this optic are very impressive. Very tactile and audible, especially for the price on these Zulisy optics. And that leads into my last pro. One of the best things about Zulisy is the fact that they are making a very good optic, and on most of those optics, they are coming in considerably cheaper than a lot of the other budget optics out there. And they tend to be just as rugged as all of those other budget options. Now, out of all the Zulisy optics I've tested on this channel, we have only had one fail, and that was the Otter Pro. And I will link that video at the end of this video. But as far as customer service went, I just reached out to them on Instagram, told them what had happened to the optic, and they shipped a new one out right away. And we took that optic back to the range and started the review process all over again. And I'm happy to say that that optic was just fine. And then later on, Zulisy had reached back out to me and told me that the first batch of those Otter Pros that had gone out, they had a defective battery door, which is what caused the issue for me. So at the end of the day, I have reviewed every optic that Zulisy has put out, and I've only had that one optic fail. So I still highly recommend these optics, especially for somebody who's a little tight on cash and just looking for something reliable to take to the range and have fun with. I really don't think you can go wrong with a Zulisy optic. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.